The stars were dying, and Ambassador Keth Var could feel each death like a knife in his chest. He stood before the great viewing wall of the Galactic Union's Central Command Station, watching as another red dot vanished from the tactical display. That dot had been the Talos system, home to 4 billion souls just 3 days ago. Now it was nothing but empty space, and the growing shadow of the void swarm. Behind him, the Emergency Council argued in hushed tones, their voices mixing together like water over stones. The Zenthari spoke in precise mathematical terms about casualty projections and resource allocation. The Delphian representatives clicked and whistled about evacuation protocols. The Altarian commanders discussed fleet movements with the careful politeness their species was known for. None of it mattered anymore. Keth Var had lived for 3 centuries, long enough to see the galaxy's greatest triumphs and darkest hours. The expansion wars had been brutal but understandable, fought between species who could at least communicate their desires for territory or resources. The plague years had been terrifying but manageable, a disease that could be studied and eventually cured. This was different. The Void Swarm didn't want anything they could recognize or negotiate with. It simply consumed everything in its path and moved on, like a living storm made of crystal and hunger. The first reports had come from the Outer Rim 6 months ago. Scout ships had found empty systems where thriving colonies should have been, nothing left but strange, crystalline growths floating in space. The Union's scientists had dismissed these as natural phenomena, some kind of unusual mineral formation. Even when the first survivors arrived speaking of ships that looked like living things and weapons that turned flesh into something else entirely, the Council had remained calm. They had protocols for first contact with hostile species. They had procedures for managing threats to galactic security. Those protocols had failed spectacularly. Every fleet sent to investigate had either vanished completely or returned with half their ships converted into something that looked like technology but moved like living creatures. The few survivors spoke of enemies that adapted to every weapon, used against them, learning from each encounter and becoming stronger. Traditional warfare relied on predictable tactics and known weaknesses. The Swarm seemed to have neither. Fleet Commander Zix Nala approached the viewing wall, her usually perfect posture showing signs of exhaustion. The Zenthari valued logic above all else, but even her calculating mind seemed to be struggling with their situation. She had lost 12 fleets in 4 months, each one larger and better equipped than the last. Her tactical computers could find no pattern in the Swarm's behavior beyond constant expansion and adaptation. "The projections are not favorable," she said in her precise way of speaking. "At current rates of expansion, the Swarm will reach the core worlds within 18 standard months. Our defensive capabilities continue to prove insufficient against their adaptive technologies." Keth Var nodded without turning around. He had read the same reports, seen the same numbers. 17 worlds lost, with no successful defense mounted, against even the smallest Swarm incursions. Their enemy didn't follow any recognizable military doctrine. It simply arrived, consumed everything it could reach, and left behind transformed versions of whatever it had found. Ships became biomechanical creatures that fought with the coordination of a hive mind. Planets became massive organisms that launched spores toward neighboring systems. The worst part was how the Swarm used their own technology against them. Energy shields that had protected the galaxy for centuries became part of the enemy's defense systems. Weapons designed to disable rather than destroy were turned into tools for conversion and control. Every innovation the Union had made in the name of civilized warfare became another weapon in the Swarm's arsenal. Commander Veltoth of the Delphian Navy joined them at the viewing wall, his translator struggling with his rapid clicking speech. "My scouts report movement in the Kepler sector. 3 more systems show signs of Swarm presence. The outer colonies are requesting immediate evacuation, but we lack sufficient transport vessels." This was the reality they faced every day now. Billions of sentient beings trapped on worlds they couldn't defend, waiting for an enemy that couldn't be reasoned with or deterred. The Union's great achievement had been creating a galaxy where conflicts could be resolved through diplomacy and limited warfare. They had built a civilization based on the idea that any problem could be solved through careful thought and mutual cooperation. The swarm rendered all of that meaningless. Keth Var finally turned away from the display, his decision crystallizing in his mind like ice forming on a winter lake. There was one option they hadn't tried, one desperate measure that violated every principle the Union had been built on. In the deepest archives of the diplomatic corps, sealed away behind warnings and classified restrictions, lay the records of humanity's first contact 50 years ago. The humans had been quarantined not because they were technologically inferior, but because their psychological profiles had terrified every xenosociologist who studied them. They thought like predators even when acting peacefully. They solved problems through controlled violence and considered casualties an acceptable price for victory. Their homeworld was classified as a Class 12 death world, meaning that simply surviving childhood there created mental patterns the rest of the galaxy found deeply disturbing. The Council had voted to isolate humanity after reviewing their military history, wars that lasted for decades over ideological differences, weapons designed specifically to cause maximum suffering, strategic doctrines that accepted the complete destruction of infrastructure if it served tactical purposes. They had been deemed too dangerous for contact with civilized species, their aggressive tendencies a threat to galactic peace. But perhaps that was exactly what they needed now. The swarm had proven immune to civilized warfare and diplomatic solutions. Maybe it was time to try uncivilized ones. Keth Var moved to his private communication station, inputting codes he had hoped never to use. The emergency beacon was designed for use only when the Union itself faced extinction, a last resort that authorized contact with any species capable of providing military assistance, regardless of their psychological profile or threat rating. His hands shook as he composed the message, knowing that he was potentially dooming the galaxy to a different kind of nightmare. The message was simple and direct, translated into the mathematical concepts that seemed to form the basis of human communication systems. Unknown species threatens all sentient life. Conventional defense ineffective. Require immediate assistance. Coordinates and tactical data attached. As the beacon launched toward the Sol system, Keth Var wondered if he had just saved the galaxy, or condemned it to something worse than the swarm. But as another star winked out on the tactical display, he realized that anything was better than watching civilization die one world at a time while they remained too civilized to fight back effectively. Captain Jake Morrison was drinking his morning coffee when the universe changed forever. The bridge of the research vessel New Horizon hummed quietly around him as his crew went about their routine duties, scanning asteroid fields and cataloging stellar phenomena in the outer reaches of the Sol system. It had been a peaceful assignment, the kind that let him forget about the war games and military drills that had dominated human space for the past 50 years. The proximity alarm shattered, the comm like glass breaking. Lieutenant Danny Cooper looked up from his sensor station with confusion written across his face. "Captain, I'm picking up an artificial signal. It's not from any human source I recognize." Morrison set down his coffee and moved to the command chair, his relaxed morning routine instantly forgotten. In 50 years of isolation, humanity had never received a signal from outside their solar system. The quarantine had been absolute, enforced by automated defense platforms that destroyed anything trying to enter or leave. "Are you sure it's artificial? Could be some kind of natural radio emission from a pulsar?" Cooper shook his head as he ran the signal through multiple analysis programs. "Negative, sir. This is definitely constructed communication. It's using mathematical concepts as a base language, prime numbers, and geometric sequences. Someone out there is trying to talk to us." Dr. Lisa Carter emerged from the science lab, her tablet clutched in her hands and excitement bright in her eyes. As the ship's xenobiologist, she had spent her entire career studying theoretical alien life forms, never expecting to encounter the real thing. Jake, this is incredible. The signal structure suggests a highly advanced civilization, possibly multiple species working together based on the complexity patterns. Morrison felt a chill run down his spine as the implications hit him. Humanity had always assumed they were alone, that the automated systems keeping them isolated were some kind of test or punishment from their own government. The idea that there were other intelligent species out there and that they were trying to make contact changed everything. Commander Ryan Blake joined them on the bridge. His tactical officer's instincts immediately focused on potential threats. He had spent 20 years training for conflicts that never came, preparing for enemies that didn't exist. Now faced with the reality of alien contact, his mind shifted into combat analysis mode. Captain, if there are other species out there, we need to consider why they're contacting us now after 50 years of silence. This could be a trap or some kind of test. The signal continued to repeat, becoming clearer as Cooper refined the translation algorithms. Slowly, mathematical concepts resolved into basic words, and then into a message that made Morrison's blood run cold. Unknown species threatening all sentient life. Conventional defense ineffective. Immediate assistance required. The coordinates that followed showed locations far beyond human space, in regions they had never explored. Carter was practically vibrating with scientific curiosity as she worked through the data. The signal originated from somewhere called the Galactic Union. Based on the power requirements needed to reach us, they must have access to technology far beyond our current capabilities. But Jake, look at this tactical data they've included. She transferred her analysis to the main screen, showing ship configurations and weapons signatures that meant nothing to human understanding. But the casualty reports were clear enough. 17 worlds lost, billions of lives consumed or converted. An enemy that adapted to every defensive strategy within hours of encountering it. Blake studied the tactical information with growing unease. These reports describe an enemy that doesn't follow any recognizable military doctrine. They don't take prisoners, they don't negotiate, and they convert captured resources into more weapons. It's like fighting against a living plague. Morrison made the decision that would thrust humanity onto the galactic stage during its most violent chapter. Danny, send a response. Tell them we received their message and are preparing to render assistance. Lisa, I want everything we can learn about this Galactic Union and their enemy. Ryan, start preparing tactical assessments for Admiral Hayes. We're about to break 50 years of isolation. The response from the aliens came within hours, faster than should have been possible across interstellar distances. Cooper translated the message with growing amazement. Captain, they're sending us coordinates for a neutral meeting point and technical specifications for faster-than-light communication. They want to establish a diplomatic channel immediately. What followed was humanity's first real conversation with alien intelligence, conducted through mathematical formulas and slowly evolving language protocols. Ambassador Keth Var of the Altarians introduced himself with careful politeness, his words carrying undertones of both hope and fear. Fleet Commander Zix Nala of the Zenthari provided precise tactical briefings that painted a picture of systematic defeat across multiple star systems. The aliens seemed simultaneously desperate for human help and terrified of what they might be unleashing. Their descriptions of the Void Swarm matched nothing in human military experience, but their defensive strategies seemed strangely familiar. They fought with careful coordination, minimal casualties, and elegant solutions designed to disable rather than destroy. It was the kind of civilized warfare that human military theorists had abandoned centuries ago as hopelessly naive. Dr. Carter made the first breakthrough in understanding their new allies when she analyzed biological data from swarm encounters. Jake, these species have evolved on worlds with stable climates and limited predation. Their immune systems are incredibly sophisticated for dealing with diseases, but they have almost no natural resistance to biological warfare or rapid adaptation scenarios. Blake reached the tactical conclusion that would define humanity's role in the galactic conflict. They're fighting a total war with peacekeeping rules. The swarm is adapting because they're trying to capture and convert instead of simply destroying. They need someone willing to use methods that civilized species won't consider. Morrison understood what his tactical officer was implying. Humanity had been quarantined because their approach to warfare terrified more peaceful species. They accepted casualties, used weapons designed to kill rather than disable, and employed strategies that prioritized victory over minimizing destruction. These were exactly the qualities needed to fight an enemy that adapted to every civilized response. The communication with Admiral Patricia Hayes at Earth Command confirmed Morrison's growing suspicions. Humanity had been isolated not because they were inferior, but because they were considered too dangerous for contact with civilized species. Their psychological profiles showed patterns of aggression and strategic thinking that other species found deeply disturbing. But perhaps that was exactly what the galaxy needed now. The swarm had proven immune to civilized warfare and diplomatic solutions. Maybe it was time to try the uncivilized approach that humanity specialized in. The meeting room aboard Kepler Station felt like a cage to Admiral Patricia Hayes, as she sat across from beings that looked like they had stepped out of humanity's wildest dreams. Ambassador Keth Var resembled a tall, elegant humanoid with skin that shifted colors like oil on water, while Fleet Commander Zix Nala appeared more reptilian with scales that caught the light in mathematical patterns. Representatives from 6 other species filled the remaining seats, each one watching the humans with a mixture of hope and barely concealed terror. Hayes had brought her best people for this first formal diplomatic contact. Captain Ben Rodriguez commanded the destroyer Storm's Edge, a compact warship designed for quick strikes and heavy fighting. Dr. Sandra Walsh led the medical frigate Healing Touch, equipped with the most advanced trauma facilities humanity could build. Commander Ryan Blake served as tactical advisor, his mind already working through the alien military data they had been given. The cultural differences became apparent within minutes of starting the planning session. Keth Var spoke in careful, measured tones about minimizing casualties and preserving infrastructure. His people had fought wars by disabling enemy ships and negotiating surrenders, treating captured opponents with dignity and respect. The concept of deliberately destroying resources or accepting friendly casualties seemed to cause him physical pain. Zix Nala approached warfare like a mathematical equation, seeking perfect solutions with predictable outcomes. Her tactical displays showed elegant fleet movements and coordinated strikes designed to achieve maximum effect with minimum risk. Every variable was calculated, every contingency planned for. The idea of improvising or accepting unpredictable results went against every instinct her species possessed. Hayes listened to their briefings with growing frustration. These aliens had technology that surpassed humanity in every measurable way, but they fought like they were playing a game with rules both sides had agreed to follow. The Void Swarm clearly didn't care about their rules, adapting to every elegant solution and turning their civilized tactics against them. "With respect, Ambassador," Hayes finally interrupted, "your enemy isn't following the same rules you are. Every time you try to capture or disable their ships, they learn from the experience and adapt. You need to stop thinking about preservation and start thinking about elimination." The silence that followed her words was heavy with disapproval. Several alien representatives shifted uncomfortably in their seats, clearly disturbed by the casual way she discussed destroying enemy forces completely. Keth Var's skin flickered through several color changes before settling on a pale blue that his translator indicated meant deep concern. Blake stepped forward with tactical displays that made the alien representatives visibly recoil. His analysis showed human approaches to the swarm problem that prioritized killing the enemy quickly, rather than trying to understand or convert them. Orbital bombardment of infected worlds, deliberate destruction of space stations to deny resources, fighting retreats through asteroid fields where damaged human ships would explode rather than allow capture. Your people treat war like surgery, Blake explained to the increasingly uncomfortable aliens. Precise, careful, designed to heal rather than harm. We treat it like cancer treatment. Sometimes you have to destroy healthy tissue to stop the disease from spreading. Dr. Walsh provided the biological perspective that began to shift the aliens' understanding of humanity's role. Her analysis of swarm samples showed that Earth's chaotic evolutionary environment had created natural resistances that more stable worlds lacked. Humans could survive direct exposure to swarm bioconversion attempts for limited periods, making them uniquely suited for close-quarters combat and sabotage missions. Your immune systems are incredible, Walsh explained to the fascinated alien scientists. You can fight off diseases that would kill us in hours, but you've never had to deal with rapid biological warfare or hostile adaptation. We've been fighting viruses and bacteria for millions of years. Our bodies know how to resist biological attacks. Captain Rodriguez outlined naval tactics that made several aliens leave the room entirely. His plans involved using civilian vessels as decoys, deliberately ramming damaged ships into enemy formations, and accepting casualty rates that the galactic species considered genocidal. Every human strategy assumed that some of their people would die, but focused on making sure the enemy died faster. The breakthrough came when Lieutenant Ashley Grant, a combat psychologist, analyzed the swarm's behavior patterns and identified something the aliens had missed. The enemy's greatest strength, perfect coordination through hive-mind communication, was also its greatest weakness if properly exploited. They adapt because they share information instantly across their entire network, Grant explained to the mixed human-alien audience. But that same network can be overloaded or corrupted if you introduce enough chaos into their system. Every time they encounter something completely unpredictable, they have to process and adapt to it. Flood them with enough random variables and their coordination starts breaking down. This was something humanity specialized in. Human military doctrine emphasized individual initiative, tactical flexibility, and the ability to function effectively, even when command structures broke down. Where the aliens saw the loss of central coordination as catastrophic failure, humans saw it as an opportunity for creative problem-solving. Admiral Hayes proposed the first joint operation that would test whether human methods could succeed where alien tactics had failed. Intelligence reports indicated that Corvus Prime, a recently converted world, still held pockets of survivors hiding in underground facilities. The Galactic Fleet could provide covering fire and evacuation support while human ground teams infiltrated the planet's converted surface. The alien representatives struggled with the moral implications of Hayes's plan. It involved accepting the probable deaths of human soldiers, the deliberate destruction of converted infrastructure that might be salvageable, and tactics that prioritized speed over precision. Everything about it violated their understanding of civilized warfare. But they were also desperate. 17 worlds had fallen using their methods, with billions of sentient beings consumed or converted. Their elegant strategies and careful calculations had proven worthless against an enemy that treated war as evolution rather than politics. Zix Nala made the decision that would change galactic warfare forever when she approved the joint operation. Her mathematical mind recognized that accepting morally questionable tactics was better than facing certain extinction through moral purity. Keth Var reluctantly agreed, his diplomatic instincts warring with the recognition that civilization itself was at stake. As the planning session ended, Hayes looked around the room at faces that showed everything from hope to horror. These aliens had called for help expecting to receive it on their terms, using their methods. Instead, they were about to learn what it meant to fight alongside a species that considered violence a necessary tool rather than a regrettable last. resort. The operation would determine whether humanity's approach to warfare could succeed where galactic civilization had failed, or whether their cure would prove worse than the disease they were fighting. The surface of Corvus Prime looked like a nightmare made real. Captain Jake Morrison pressed himself against what had once been a building wall, watching crystalline growths pulse with sick light as they spread across the landscape like veins of living infection. The swarm had transformed the entire planet into a single organism, converting cities into feeding nodes and turning the atmosphere itself into a tool for biological warfare. Morrison's team consisted of 12 human Marines and 4 alien specialists, each one equipped with protective gear that Dr. Walsh had designed based on her studies of swarm bioconversion. The aliens moved with obvious fear, their elegant equipment looking fragile against the twisted landscape around them. The humans adapted quickly, using rubble for cover and treating the hostile environment like any other battlefield they had trained for. Lieutenant Colonel Maria Santos led the advance team through what had been the capital city's main thoroughfare. Her Marines moved with practiced efficiency, using hand signals and tactical awareness that impressed their alien observers. Where the galactic species saw chaos and horror, the humans saw tactical opportunities and defensive positions. Movement. Ahead, whispered Sergeant Kevin Walsh as he spotted biomechanical constructs emerging from a converted building. The creatures had once been the planet's native species, but swarm conversion had turned them into something that mixed organic tissue with crystalline technology. They moved with perfect coordination, sharing information through biological networks that pulsed beneath their transformed skin. Santos made the decision that demonstrated everything the aliens found both admirable and terrifying about human nature. Instead of trying to disable the constructs or find a way around them, she ordered a direct assault using weapons designed to destroy rather than capture. The humans fought like they were exterminating a disease, showing no hesitation about killing creatures that had once been sentient beings. The alien observers watched in fascination and horror as the Marines worked together without needing constant communication. When Corporal Danny Fisher's weapon jammed, Private Amy Carter immediately provided covering fire without being asked. When the constructs adapted to their energy weapons, Sergeant Tony Phillips improvised explosives from swarm biomatter itself, turning the enemy's own converted materials against them. Dr. Lisa Carter made the first breakthrough in understanding swarm technology when she analyzed a partially converted facility. Unlike the aliens who tried to study the enemy's methods to find elegant solutions, she approached it like a biologist dissecting a dangerous organism. Her analysis revealed that the swarm's conversion process had critical vulnerabilities during the early stages of transformation. The bioconversion requires a stable chemical environment, Carter explained to the mixed human-alien team as they took shelter in an underground bunker. If we can introduce enough biological chaos into their system, we can disrupt the process, and even reverse some of the early-stage conversions. This was exactly the kind of information the galactic species needed but could never have obtained through their careful, non-destructive research methods. Carter had discovered it by deliberately contaminating swarm samples with Earth bacteria and observing the results. Her willingness to risk creating new biological weapons had provided insights that pure scientific study never could. The rescue operation began when Morrison's team located the first group of survivors hiding in the planet's underground transport system. 300 aliens of various species had been trapped for weeks, slowly starving while biomechanical hunters searched for them above. The galactic representatives wanted to establish a secure perimeter and evacuate them slowly using proper medical protocols. The humans understood that they didn't have time for proper protocols. Swarm adaptation meant that every hour they spent on the planet increased the enemy's understanding of their tactics and equipment. Morrison made the hard choice to begin evacuations immediately, accepting that some people might be injured in the rush rather than risk losing everyone to enemy adaptation. The evacuation went wrong when swarm bioconstructs detected the human activity and began converging on their position. What followed was a running battle through converted tunnels that showcased both human adaptability and their willingness to make terrible sacrifices for the greater good. Corporal Fisher volunteered to stay behind with an improvised explosive device, buying time for the evacuees to reach the surface extraction point. His death was quick and efficient, taking out a critical swarm coordination node and disrupting enemy communications across an entire sector of the converted city. The alien survivors couldn't understand how humans could make such decisions so quickly, treating individual lives as acceptable losses in service of larger tactical goals. Captain Rodriguez demonstrated human naval doctrine when his evacuation ship came under attack from swarm biovessels that had adapted to previous rescue attempts. Instead of trying to outmaneuver them or disable their weapons, he ordered a direct ramming attack that destroyed his ship's main drive but eliminated 3 enemy vessels in the resulting explosion. The aliens watched in amazement as Rodriguez's crew worked together to keep their damaged ship functional long enough to complete the evacuation. Where galactic crews would have followed emergency protocols and awaited rescue, the humans improvised repairs using whatever materials they could find and refused to abandon their mission even when their ship was clearly beyond saving. Dr. Walsh's medical teams worked miracles during the evacuation, treating injuries and bioconversion exposure with techniques that the alien doctors found both brilliant and disturbing. She used experimental treatments that had never been tested on alien physiology, accepting the risk of causing harm in order to prevent certain death from swarm conversion. The breakthrough moment came when Sergeant Phillips and his demolition team disappeared into a partially converted swarm facility and emerged 3 hours later having planted explosive charges throughout its biological nervous system. The spectacular destruction that followed sent shockwaves through the swarm's coordination network, causing confusion and disorientation across the entire planetary organism. As the joint human-alien fleet withdrew from Corvus Prime, with over 2,000 rescued survivors, the tactical implications of their success became clear. Human methods worked where galactic tactics had failed, but at a cost in lives and moral certainty that left their alien allies struggling to understand what they had witnessed. Admiral Hayes received the after-action reports with mixed feelings. The operation had succeeded beyond all expectations, proving that human approaches to warfare could disrupt swarm coordination and rescue people that the aliens had written off as lost. But the cost in human lives and the brutal efficiency of their methods had clearly disturbed their new allies. The real test would come with the next phase of the war, when humanity would have to prove that their violent methods could not just win individual battles, but actually defeat an enemy that had conquered 17 worlds using conventional galactic warfare. The Nexus Cluster had once been the crown jewel of galactic civilization. 7 star systems linked by ancient jump gates that allowed instant travel across vast distances. Now it served as humanity's final proving ground as the core swarm fleet emerged from dark space like a living nightmare made of crystal and hunger. Ships the size of moons drifted through the void, their biomechanical hulls pulsing with organic rhythms that spoke of intelligence beyond anything the galaxy had encountered before. Admiral Patricia Hayes stood on the bridge of her flagship, watching tactical displays that showed the true scope of what they faced. The combined human-alien fleet numbered less than 300 ships, facing a swarm armada that stretched across light-years of space. Every rational calculation suggested they would be destroyed within hours of engaging the enemy. Hayes had stopped trusting rational calculations weeks ago. The battle began exactly as every previous engagement with the swarm had started, with long-range exchanges of energy weapons and careful positioning of fleet elements. The galactic commanders followed their traditional doctrine, seeking to disable enemy vessels and capture their technology for study. The swarm responded as it always did, adapting to each new weapon signature and turning captured ships into more effective versions of themselves. Commander Ryan Blake watched from the tactical station as the enemy began its inevitable adaptation process. Zenthari energy cannons that had worked perfectly in the first exchange were already proving less effective as swarm biohulls evolved defensive measures. Altarian shield generators found their frequencies matched and countered by crystalline, growths that learned to absorb their specific energy patterns. "All ships, implement Plan Chaos," Hayes ordered when the swarm's adaptation began overwhelming their coordinated tactics. What followed was something no galactic species had ever attempted in the history of organized warfare. Every human ship abandoned formation and began operating independently, using unpredictable tactics that prevented the swarm from developing effective countermeasures. Captain Ben Rodriguez took his destroyer Storm's Edge on a suicidal run through the enemy formation, launching every weapon he had before ramming his ship into a biovessel 3 times his size. The explosion that followed wasn't calculated for maximum tactical effect, but the chaos it created disrupted swarm coordination across an entire sector of their fleet. Captain Jake Morrison led a squadron of volunteer ships toward the heart of the swarm mothership, carrying a payload that Dr. Lisa Carter had designed from modified Earth viruses and bacterial cultures. The mission was simple in concept, but terrifying in execution. Deliver biological weapons directly into the enemy's neural processing centers, and hope that Earth's chaotic evolutionary history could disrupt a hive mind that had never encountered truly random biological warfare. The aliens watched in fascination and horror as human tactics created exactly the kind of chaos that their enemy couldn't adapt to fast enough. Where the swarm expected coordinated fleet movements, human captains made individual decisions based on immediate tactical situations. Where biomechanical constructs anticipated predictable weapon signatures, human engineers modified their equipment, mid-battle using whatever materials they could find. Dr. Sandra Walsh proved that human medical doctrine applied even in the depths of space combat when her hospital ship Healing Touch deliberately moved into the battle zone to rescue crews from disabled vessels regardless of their species. Her medical teams worked under fire to save alien survivors who had never seen humans risk their own lives for strangers. The turning point came when Sergeant Tony Phillips and his demolition team, thought lost during the initial assault, emerged. From inside a converted swarm vessel having spent hours planting explosive charges throughout its nervous system. Their successful infiltration had required them to survive direct exposure to bioconversion attempts, while working in conditions that would have killed most galactic species within minutes. Phillips's sacrifice triggered a cascade failure across the swarm fleet as explosive charges detonated inside the mothership's neural networks. The hive mind that had coordinated billions of biomechanical constructs across 17 star systems suddenly found itself cut off from its primary processing centers. For the first time since the war began, swarm vessels began operating independently, rather than as parts of a single organism. Commander Blake coordinated the final assault as confused enemy ships struggled to adapt to tactics they couldn't share information about. Human captains exploited every moment of swarm confusion, pressing attacks that prioritized killing the enemy quickly rather than trying to capture or understand their technology. Captain Morrison's biological warfare payload reached the mothership's core just as its defensive systems began recovering from Phillips's demolition work. The Earth viruses that Dr. Carter had modified spread through biomechanical networks like wildfire, causing system failures that the swarm's perfect adaptation couldn't counter because the biological chaos was too random to analyze and respond to effectively. The final explosion of the swarm mothership lit up the Nexus cluster like a new star being born. Biovessels throughout the enemy fleet convulsed as their controlling intelligence died, leaving them as mindless husks drifting through space. The perfect coordination that had made them unstoppable became their weakness when the mind controlling them was destroyed. In the aftermath, as rescue ships moved through the debris field searching for survivors, Ambassador Keth Var struggled to understand what he had witnessed. The humans had saved galactic civilization, but they had done it using methods that challenged every principle the Union had been built on. They had accepted casualties that other species would consider genocidal, used weapons that civilized warfare had banned, and fought with a brutality that made victory feel like moral defeat. Admiral Hayes found herself facing questions that had no easy answers as she met with the surviving galactic representatives. The Union wanted to offer humanity full membership and a place among the galactic community, but they also needed to grapple with what their rescuers were capable of when pushed to extremes. "You saved us," Kethvar said during the final diplomatic meeting, his skin cycling through colors that indicated deep emotional conflict. "But now we must live with the knowledge of what salvation costs when it comes from warriors rather than peacekeepers." Hayes looked out at the stars through the station's viewing ports, understanding that humanity's isolation was over, but their responsibility to the galaxy had only just begun. They had proven that deathworld predators could fight battles that civilized species couldn't win, but they had also shown that sometimes the cure could be almost as frightening as the disease. The galaxy would never be the same, and neither would humanity now that they knew they weren't alone among the stars.